It's live.
Oh, hey.
Hold
I
on.
feel live. Oh, shit.
There it is.
Technical. Can I curse on this?
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, you can let it eat.
I don't think I can talk without cursing.
I've been saying the F word a lot today.
Eesh.
I was saying it so much today that during dinner, I dropped a few during dinner. It's probably just the ball talk in me.
I can't turn the locker room off. I use the F word with my 4-year-old.
That's
my
what I'm
wife
saying.
hates it.
I think the locker room came in. You just feel that getting us here.
Yeah.
It's just really getting here.
I dropped an F-bomb on Gray the other day, and Kate's like, can we leave that out? And Gray goes, Dad, why the fucking? And I go, well, the first 3 times you get
Gray
no
said
fucking.
that?
Yeah, I go, the first 3 times you get no fucking. The 4th time, I'm sorry, I got to get a fucking there.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I was saying it so much during dinner that I was thinking to myself, like, man, I might be letting it rip on this podcast because the clubhouse was coming out of me.
I think that was my bad. I was ripping hard too.
Were you?
Yeah.
Is that where it was coming from?
Maybe.
So this is a throat tea. It's going to coat the throat. I find it as a very advantageous tea for the podcast. And you were saying this to me before when we've just sat down. You know, it's funny because when I was in the bathroom just now, you know, taking my pregame leak, and as I was looking in the mirror, I was like, I'm gonna do something in this one. Like I'm gonna go in there.
All right.
I know, and I think that's just comfortability.
Yeah.
But that's how I was feeling. So
Yeah.
when you were like, yeah, it's go time.
We're not scared to deep dive out the gate.
We're not, man. Cheers to this, by the way.
Cheers.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, I mean, shit. I'm flattered that you drove 40 minutes to pick me up to come hang. That's a friend.
Yeah, well, now here comes the awkward part for all of us. And boy, did I not foresee that coming. I stopped to get a little workout in.
Oh,
That doesn't matter.
no problem.
Does it?
No. I got a
Okay.
hike in.
Okay, yeah, then that's fair.
Yeah.
So because
If you think that I thought you were going to show up at 4 o'clock sharp, you're fucking.
is that what time I
tripping.
said? Is that what time I was thinking?
Yeah.
So I felt like that was okay. I actually stopped at the manhole Spencer Howard spot.
Oh, nice.
And I got a quick little push-up combo in.
So old Spenny Howe is working out at, I don't know the name of the facility. He's working out with a guy that was a pitching coach with me with Minnesota, this kid, Jared Gaynor.
Okay.
So we were talking about Spencer the other day. Tell him I said, what's up?
I will. He was just telling me he's going over to Japan here soon, and he was showing me the Japanese baseball. And have you ever felt the Japanese baseball?
Yes.
It's definitely different.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on that?
I like it. It's a little sticky. It's got like kind of a standard tack to it, which feels like it's kind of a no-brainer for the major leagues to implement. We got to try them out. Rajai Davis brought some to New York a couple years ago when we were playing the Mets. And I think it was in advance of either the WBC or some summer tournament that was happening. But it's kind of a no-brainer for me. If you don't, if you're going to regulate sticky, you might as well just make all the balls sticky. Why not?
So the ball is naturally. Do you feel like you hear yourself in the mic?
Yeah. You not hearing it? Should I get in there?
See, that sounded different, did it not?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, maybe bring it up just a slight bit, but not too much. Don't want to bother Chels. That's good. That's good.
You don't want to bother your pregnant wife while she's in the bath?
No, I don't want to.
I can just lean.
Yeah, just feel it out.
Give it a little side lean.
Yeah, just feel it out. If it gets neck pain, just lean back for a second.
I'll be all right.
Hey, how about we haven't even acknowledged the WOTUS on you.
Oh, this is my baseball idol. Legendary third base coach Ron Wotus for the San Francisco Giants. Got 3 World Series rings, 1, 2, 3. And like to wear all black like Johnny Cash, so we gave him a farewell tour T-shirt. This is the 2021 Giants Wotus tee, and it's a collector's item.
It really is, and I think that's part of the bit. We'll see what happens from this show, maybe. And we can shout out a lot to Ron Wotus. I talked about Wotus recently with Crawford on the show, and we were talking about Woe and some of the stories that it had. And I can only imagine the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who have Ron Wotus stories. And I think of one of the things, he came in one time with snakeskin boots and looked at me after we had lost a game, actually. We had lost a game, and he looked at me with snakeskin boots, and he tapped me on my shoulder, and all he says, he goes, "You get a look at these boots?" And I was like, "Yeah, they look pretty good." Well, he goes, "You get these when you win."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's got to rub it in.
After one of the World Series, Bochy brought them to a boot shop in Denver. Got the whole team boots with World Series logos on them from that season. So I've actually requested Duran. I don't think he's going to follow through with it, but we'll see. That he leave me those boots in his will.
Those snake skins?
I don't know if they're snake skin. They're some kind of skin, but they have a World Series patch from, I think it was 2012.
Oh, so the World Series.
Yeah, I want the World Series boots.
Have you seen it?
The boots?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he wears them all the time.
That's not the one I'm talking about then.
I mean, he's got multiple boots.
Right.
He's got 3 titles. Like, guy's got a boot collection.
Like, what is the logo on the back?
Yeah,
of
it's
the
like
boot?
the specific World Series logo from that season. You know how there's like a unique one every year. So I think it was 2012. But man, you should get Wotus on here. What a get that would be.
Yeah, we'll get him on here. I mean, he's gonna be down here for camp.
He would be electric.
Yeah, but that would be, you know, what'd be cool is if the 3 of us did one.
Yeah, I would love that. Like a little 21 Giants roundtable.
That would be fun. Wotus was, I told the story in the last one, so I'm going to just speed through it. But Wotus was one of the first introductions I had with the Giants when I was coaching. And it was the first time I spoke to the team. I went into the clubhouse, that little smaller clubhouse in spring training. And I was sitting in my locker and I was, you know, like when you're anticipating something for days in advance and then it happens, it was only like a 15, 20 minute spiel, but I was exhausted at 8 a.m. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I was exhausted afterwards. And I just felt so accomplished that I was able to do that. And I saw Wotus and it was very easy to tell that he was sort of the top of the hierarchy. So I asked him how he felt the speech went, which I would love to talk more about this in general. But he tapped me with a fungo bat and he said, "Oh, yeah, no one heard what you said." He goes, "The point is, could you just stand up there and talk?" And he goes, "Let's get your stuff over here and get out to practice."
Yeah. Well, so in 21, you know, when you kind of find your footing in the dugout, where you're supposed to stand, where you spend your time in the dugout, whether you're on offense or defense. And the dugout situation happened to be Cap was right on the stairs. Bales was next to him. I was next to Bales. And then Woe would come in on the left side of me. So we got to talk for 4.5 innings every game about baseball and watch the game together. So Woe and I got really close in 21. Just one of the best baseball experiences for me, being able to talk to him all the time. But there were 2 things that Woe would always say. Number one was, I think he got this from Gene Glynn, who was a longtime Twins coach. Yeah. Gino would, if you had a tough loss, he'd come in the locker room after the game and he'd stand at his locker and be a little forlorn and go, "It's a shame. Well, that's baseball." And he would just move on with his life. So Woe did that all the time, which was great. And then once in the dugout, he was telling me something and he went through this long spiel of his explanation for why something happened. And I was like, "Okay, it's good info, Woe." And he goes, "Yeah, you know, I could be wrong. It's happened before. I found out later I was right, but I still count it." Which is just classic. He's like an old Jewish lady and Seinfeld combined that spent 30 years in baseball. You know,
it's incredible.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I was going to ask this next, and it maybe step outside of Woe, but it'll be based off of Woe. What is it that makes people? There's like I just mentioned, my first interaction that I had with Woe. That was the first day I was with the Giants, and I knew he was that guy.
Yeah.
I could feel that, right?
Yeah.
And there's like an energy about people who I wouldn't know how to sum Woe up, because you can. He's so Woe. He's so Ron Wotus. He's so him. And I think that there's so many people who are so cool and unique, and you gravitate towards them. And it's like that story you just shared. Even that story he shared with me, it stands with me so profoundly because it's funny, and he's so funny that if you know Woe, you know that's like a funny story. Like you laugh after I say it, right?
Yeah.
But it's also like incredibly wise. And it was something that has stuck with me. And as years have gone on, I think I told him this after this past year too. When I was done, I told him that meant a lot to me as a young teacher and a young coach, because I do feel like that there's a lot of information inside of that you can use. It's that, well, no one was listening, but that's not what's important. What's important is, could you stand up in the arena metaphorically and speak?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I took from it. And it was just like the ability to just like do it.
Yeah.
And that's what Woe gave me so much of that over the years, as he does to everybody else. But it's like, what is it that, is it time? Is it experience? Like what are the magic ingredients that make people so unique at those stages of their life, where it's like everybody who comes into contact with them just allows themselves to be like a student? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one, he is like highly intelligent.
Right.
Highly intelligent, been around the game for a long time. I think he was a Giants employee for 29 or 30 years, and he's still involved with the team. Like, he hangs out in spring training. He's always in the locker room with us, after games, before games, on the field doing work. Like, he's someone that is so comfortable in that environment that he has really no choice but to like exude that comfort, right? And that confidence and that energy around the game. And he loves baseball. Like, you can just feel it on him. You can smell it on him. And so, yeah, that year, 21, I think it was my first year in the big leagues.
21? 20 was, I thought.
No, it was 21.
Okay.
Yeah, first year, it was my first year. And, most of the staff joined in 20.
Okay.
And then you and I came on in 21.
Okay.
And I was a little bit focused on like finding my role. I was an assistant pitching coach. I was trying to do everything I could to support Andrew Bailey, trying to like give Cap what he needed, trying to make sure the pitchers had what they needed. And at times that becomes like a little frustrating, because you're kind of like, I don't really know exactly what to do, right? But the one thing that I could do every game was talk to Will. And when you pile up, a full game's worth of conversations and insights from him over 160 or 170 games, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that. And it really just forged this bond with Woe and I early, that like, we talk once a week in the off season, and it just felt really unique, and it felt really, I felt really fortunate to have that experience. And I hope that, in my future as a coach, that people talk about me that way, right?
Sure.
That people feel that when I walk in a room, or people want my opinion on stuff. Like, he's given so many talks to the whole team in the locker room about a player, when a player hits his 10-year milestone, or you have a tough loss or tough win.
That's a good point.
Anytime there's a meeting, Woe's the guy that speaks up, and everybody listens. Nobody's, looking at the ceiling or talking to the guy next to him. Everybody's locked in on Woe, and I think that speaks volumes. Maybe they actually were listening to what he was saying and not just seeing if he could talk up there.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good point. I think, because I've noticed that too with him, and that kind of brings it back to because there are people there's not a lot of people who can do that in terms of communicate and speak. And now all of a sudden it's, I think of moments just in general in life. What is it that's such a valuable trait in our society. So if we even step out of that, just think of people that in your life, whether that was in high school, college, teammates that you had in clubhouses who could get up and speak. That's such a valuable skill to have. Do you think that's trainable, or do you think that's innate in us?
I think it's trainable. I think it takes balls. I think
Sure.
the first time you do it, I doubt Will was doing that as a first year coach. Maybe 5 years in, maybe 10 years in. He was, the bench coach for Bochy. So I think status has something to do with it.
Sure.
But I think at this point, like, he's just been in so many rooms with so many talented people and so many talented players, that I heard something the other day that I really liked, and maybe this applies to Will, maybe it doesn't, but it said, fear is not something you fight or you conquer. It's something that you ride. You just get better at riding it, right? So like, I think Woe probably early on, if I had to guess, was probably a little bit nervous about speaking up in front of the group, but I think he learned how to like ride that fear into the way he does. And, maybe the Johnny Cash reference makes sense, because he's kind of like an old rodeo guy or something, right? He's been there, done that, seen some tough rides, and you can tell like he's got the vibe.
Well, you are obviously you were on that mini series that we did over a year now. So even how I'm getting more organized, as you can tell.
Way more.
Right. We've talked a little bit about that tonight, but that was part of it was like the last shedding of the old skin of that last show that we did on the Zoom with the 40-minute timer, because I wasn't going to pay for the upgrade.
Yeah.
And we were just letting it eat virtually. And you were at you were at like a youth baseball field, if you remember, with the headphones on.
Yeah.
And I was in my house at the time that we had in Minnesota. So why I'm saying that is because people who maybe have listened to you on the miniseries of The Art of Something there's been a lot of time that has gone by. That was before the 2024 season, and we're about a month away from the 2025 season. Mm-hmm. So this will be a fun conversation for both of us to look back as friends of just purely 2 recordings that we had with somewhat of a length, right?
Yeah.
But we've had tons of conversations over the years, and where I'm going with this is since the last time we've communicated, you were an assistant pitching coach for the San Francisco Giants. You have now moved on to the head pitching coach of the San Francisco Giants, and you're also talking about the scenario you just shared with Woe of he's kind of seen things, he's kind of experienced these things. And so it's hard for me not to ask specifically about where do you feel right now, and this will be cool as friends, of how this evolves, because I know we'll challenge each other. But from where that stage in your career was when you were sitting on the bench with Woe, mm-hmm. and you were that 2021 year, first year in the big leagues, you're an mm-hmm. assistant pitching coach at the time. And now you're going to be standing on in that same dugout, but you're not really going to have correct me if I'm wrong, you're not really going to have as much time to just sit there and listen to somebody and learn.
Right.
Because you're going to be you're going to have to be locked
yeah.
in more, and clearly they're both locked in. Mm-hmm. They're 2 different shades of being locked in.
Yeah.
So walk me through where you're at today mentally, preparing for that, reflecting on the past.
Yeah. I think one thing I really wanted to do from the jump, the moment I made it to a big league staff, was to use every ounce of my attention I could to learn. And so 21, I had much less experience, much less responsibility. And I had more time to learn. I had more time to devote to listening to Woe mm-hmm. or just watching the game. I would spend our offensive innings. Bales would usually be talking to the starting pitcher or calling somebody on the bullpen phone or going through the next lineup portion that we're going to face the following inning. And I would do those things as well. I'd be prepped out looking at who we might go to in the 5th or the 6th or whatever. But a lot of times I spent our offensive inning watching the opposing pitcher, looking for tips, watching our guys hit, just paying attention to the other half of the game that wasn't my responsibility. I probably won't be able to do that as much now because I'll probably be busy with other things during offensive half. But man, there's not anywhere else in the world that you can learn as much about baseball as you can in a major league dugout. And so I felt like I had 4 years of learning from people.
Yeah.
And being able to take advantage of my lack of responsibility, if that makes sense. I still gained responsibility every year to the point where I was probably doing the most last year that I'd ever done. And now I think I'm excited about having more responsibility. That feels fun to me. I still feel like baseball is the art of paying attention. And so I'll still be paying really close attention to what's happening. I'll probably be paying more attention to the pitchers than I've ever paid. But I think, it's weird because I don't feel nervous. I think I probably would have been nervous if I got the job last year or the year before that. And it's not that I'm not taking the opportunity seriously. It's just that I feel prepared. I feel like I've done what I need to do to show that I'm ready. And now I'm ready, and I'm excited to show how ready I am, right? And to have the pitchers feel that and have us all kind of pull on the same rope to be good.
Well, I think that you said this a second ago about there's no other place to learn than in the major league clubhouse or major league dugout. And you'd said this to me a few years ago, and this really stuck with me when I was either first or second year, but you've said this numerous times. I remember like one of the first times you had said it around me and to me it was really profound in the fact that you were we were categorizing the entire landscape of pro athletes and sports and going through the range of it. And you really hammered home the importance of the fact that when you're in the big leagues and you're doing something daily, and let's count spring training as well. So let's go an 8-month sort of vortex, right? Like for 8 months, you're doing the same thing regularly. And it can seem so minute over the course of 8 months. Like it's just another day of catch. Mm-hmm. It's just another game of being in the dugout. But you really hammered home to me the importance of understanding how many reps your eye was going to get and how many reps your ear would get and how much of your perspective would get honed out through this consistency. And the way I took it was it might not be these profound bi-weekly events maybe mm-hmm. that you could have in different industries or different disciplines of teaching. Mm-hmm. It was more of this extremely insane, consistent approach to being involved in an energy with the highest performing people on the planet for this specific sport.
Yeah.
And I think that having an awareness towards that, you were aware of that probably even before the big leagues, and you can talk to that if it hits you in any unique way. But I think when you're aware of that, and I can be a testament to you saying that to me years ago, mm-hmm. in being in that vantage point and being able to carry that awareness and knowing that you would eventually be doing what you're doing, mm-hmm. I think that's probably, I would imagine that's why you don't feel nervous, because it was part of the whole thing. You'd probably... You envisioned that.
Yeah. I mean, I played high school ball. I played college ball. I played 5-6 years of professional baseball, but I don't really feel like I had a good work ethic until I got to grad school in my late 20s. I was looking for something to do after my career. I chose to do a post-grad program of architecture. Hardest I've ever worked in my life. Most work I've been assigned. Hardest I've ever worked. Worked hard enough that by the end of a couple of years I was burnt out doing mm-hmm. it and was looking for something else. Shifted to coaching, and then I applied that same work ethic and that same attentiveness to coaching, and that really is when my coaching started to take off. And it wasn't something that I did as a player. Like I don't have many regrets or anything like that. I think I worked hard, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I had a renewed interest in the craft of coaching after I left higher education. And, I think you talked on one of your previous podcasts, maybe it was your first moment with Mart. Somebody asked the question about, what is consistency underrated? Is spectacular and exceptional given the edge in those departments,
Nick McCoy.
Right? Yeah. And I listened to it on the flight over here to Scottsdale, and it's pretty obvious for me that I think consistency is totally underrated. Yeah. Like I feel like the brick by brick approach or the making daily deposits that gain compound interest approach is the way to become what it is you want to become. And it's a very like make yourself approach. You can really only connect the dots looking backwards. Like, oh, this thing that I did made sense and it led me to this. But I think if you're not,
I like that.
If you're not honed in on the opportunity of each day or the opportunity of each interaction, even, right? Like we were talking about Joan Ryan earlier, right? Like I saw 50 people a day walk by Joan Ryan in the kitchen.
Incredible.
Yeah. And me and you would sit down at her table and talk to her, and I'm way better for having talked to her. So I think seeing the opportunity in each interaction, seeing the opportunity in each small inning or half inning of baseball and how that can lead to a better understanding of it and lead to a better coaching practice for you or coaching skill set, I think it's key. And, I hope I wasn't being like, you better do this, but I felt it in my own craft, and you seemed like a craftsman. So I think it was just something that I shared and we kind of resonated on.
Well, what is your initial feeling when I ask you do you love coaching? And I'll probably keep hammering on that for a second, but let's just think of it like that. If I say that to you, do you love coaching?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But did you go on?
Yeah, so this is not a slight to the players that I coach before the point that I'm going to talk about, but I gave lessons to younger kids. I coached high school ball. I coached high level high school ball. I coached college summer ball. And it wasn't until that summer that I coached college summer ball that I thought, yeah, this is the age kid. Like, this is the level of player that I want to coach. I actually loved A-ball. I loved A-ball. And I was ready to spend a long time in A-ball before I got a chance to be a coordinator with Minnesota. But I thought going from half season to full season, traveling by bus, having to log 150 innings as a starting pitcher, having to deal with going up and down, all the stuff that there is to work on at that level, I just loved it. And there was definitely coaches that I admired growing up. My high school coach was an excellent coach. My dad was a tennis coach, so I was getting coached at home in some ways, even though it was mostly just through conversation because I didn't play like highly competitive tennis. I had good college coaches. I had coaches in pro ball that I really enjoyed talking to. And one thing that I whether it was my own approach to coaching or whether coaching itself changed because of some of the tech and some of the skill work that got introduced, now it feels like you can be a student of the game more than ever. I can read an article on fastball usage. I can read a book on how to design pitches or how to evaluate performance metrics, right? I can spend time with people like Whoa, and not that I think people did that forever, right? Like that's, you talk about players or coaches that are students of the game. Right. Now I feel like you can be a student of the game more than just paying attention. I feel like you can add to that kind of attention-based pursuit with like hard technical skills and reading about the craft that everybody, loves and is trying to get better at.
So when decently, it's an information era. Do you find any paradox to how much information there could be, or do you find that could be overload? I mean, it's unfair for me to ask you this in the sense that I've watched you very closely and I've watched you dissect your learning, and you're just a very curious person in general. And I think you connect a lot of dots to a lot of dots. So I feel biased, and tell me if I'm wrong. Because you are a student of the game, but you attach your learning in baseball to things outside of baseball from my perspective. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what makes being a student maybe so curious to you, or it gravitates to you, and you're just using maybe the medium of baseball. And I could be incredibly off on that. But what I'm saying is there's a massive information era.
Yeah.
And could that disrupt? Could it be too much? Go to both, whatever you're feeling.
Yeah, I think, I guess to attack the first part of the question, I am a generalist, right? Like I have plenty of interests outside of baseball, music, cooking, architecture, art, nature, all these things are, not to stroke myself or anything, but like baseball's not my only thing. And you and I talked about this in 21 and 22, based on, coaches that were really good coaches, but it seemed like their whole world revolved around getting to the park and being at the park and the game, and that there wasn't many interests outside of it. You and I have pretty wide-ranging interests outside of baseball, but I do feel like I attack or I devote the same amount of enthusiasm to baseball that I do to those other things, right? And then I think being a generalist, it helps me make those connections with stuff outside of baseball. Yeah. Whereas if it was only baseball all the time, I'd only be connecting baseball to baseball. And sometimes that doesn't always land with players, right? I'm a big analogy and metaphor guy, right? I'll always compare, like I was just talking to somebody today about how pitching is actually like football, right? Where like, the best offenses in the league, in the NFL, get the most first downs. So if you have a great playbook, but you can't move the ball, then you're never going to score, right? So if you're a pitcher and you got a great arsenal, but you're always behind in the count and you can't ever get strike one or get to two strikes, you're never going to be in the red zone. You're never going to punch anything in. And those things make sense to me because I'm a generalist. And I've found when I communicate stuff like that with players, those things really land and stick with them, So I think Woe was a guy that was really good at that. I've been around people that are good at that as well. And then just I think some of the positive feedback around how I think of things and how I connect things has gone well with players and coaches when we're having conversations about stuff, right? So that's the first part. I think the second part is there was a joke that we used to use when I was in player development in Minnesota. It was like, the computer has all the answers, but it doesn't have any questions, right? So like,
wow,
you have to understand, like what's the question that I'm asking of it? Like, what are the things I'm trying to uncover about pitching, and not just here's everything, right? So at the risk of sounding, I don't know, arrogant, I think pitching coaches now are closer to detectives than we are to like, skill work instructors, right?
Wow. Yeah.
I think what did Bill Bowerman with Oregon say? He's an instructor of competitive response. What's his thing, right? We are now trying to look at all the information that's available, interview witnesses, look for clues, maybe do some forensic work, and then decide like, here's the path that we're going to go down. And a lot of times that involves talking to the player a ton about it and having a really good reasoning for doing it. So I like the challenge of, here's what I think you should do, and here's why. I've done this work on it. I've looked at these metrics. I've looked at your biomechanics. I've talked to your old pitching coach from AA. And remember you told me that one time about this thing you did with your back leg? And like the guys like Alex Cobb would be like, how the fuck do you remember that?
Yeah.
I told you that like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it landed and I wrote it down and I remembered it. And so at its core, whether you're a detective or you're an instructor of competitive response, coaching is just about synthesizing ideas and making sure that those ideas land with players.
Do you think that would you say one of the best ways to do that is story form?
Yeah, I think it's a good one.
And do you think that's where that is so advantageous for you to be a generalist, because you can expand out, because that's a unique, it's artistic in a way.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in New Orleans. New Orleans is a pretty story-based culture. My dad's a great storyteller, great joke teller. I love to tell a good joke. Mm-hmm. And so I think somewhere between long form story and like fable or joke is like, if you can talk to a player about something and deliver a punchline that lands with them and they remember it, you're money. And that takes a lot of practice. And I don't think it's innate. I don't think it's something that I was born with, but over time, my storytelling craft around coaching stories has gotten better.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the power in reps so often, because you still have so many. Think of the stories that you land early in your career that don't land, and it just hurts.
Yeah.
You're just pained by something not landing, but you learn what doesn't land. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you get to the points where you find out what lands. When I first started speaking publicly and I would do presentations with groups, one of the things that I hated this process. And I did this actually I did this maybe 2 years ago publicly. I gave a presentation, and I don't know if I've ever apologized to Logan Gelbrick, who we both know. But Logan had brought me to LA to give a presentation, and he's brought me there a few times over the years. But I had my rinse and repeat punch out presentation workshop that I'd been running for a few years. But it was losing its juice. And this is when I wrote the book Without Words, because I was like, I'm going to try this thing out, this new thing. And I tried it, and I think it went okay. I don't know what people would think about it, but it didn't do okay.
Yeah.
It didn't land. And I was embarrassed when I went home. And I felt so bad that I did that to a guy that I love so much.
Nah.
Yeah, no, that's where I felt safe trying it. But my point is, when I first started speaking a long time ago to people, I learned really quickly that because I used to work, I did a lot of stuff for free the first couple of years. And I used those free reps like you're talking about in learning, because I was realizing that I had to say things. I had to make sound. You've probably heard me say it to the boys. Like I've always said, we're just making sound out here. But I found out really early, like I need to say these things and I need to feel the reaction of the room.
Yeah.
Like I have to learn what lands. And if this doesn't land, I got to figure out if I'm really in on that metaphor or that story or that framework of teaching, then I either have to figure out how to land it or I got to figure out how to kill it quickly and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So I had two parts to this. A, do you feel a connection to that in your own journey, in your own rights? Like have you thought about that from your coaching? And then B, no, I'll just start there for the start. Like have you noticed parts early in your career that things weren't landing, or what you were picking up on players, and this I needed to navigate, or that maybe I need to change my tone, or maybe I need to be shorter in or out, longer form, whatever? Like how would you kind of massage your own craft?
Yeah, I mean, definitely rep based. I think if you're not embarrassed about the way you were coaching a few years ago, then like you haven't improved. Right? You don't have the self-awareness to be like, I was kind of fucking this up a couple of years back. I think of coaching in some ways like stand-up comedy. I love stand-up comedy.
Yeah, me too. I love
all shapes and forms of stand-up comedy. And, I've heard many comedians talk about bombing, right? You go out on stage, you're using your new material, you're getting crushed. It's a bad crowd, or they don't like your material. And almost all of those comedians, in some of the more recent specials, you see them do like a litmus test joke early, right? Where they like tell a really vulgar joke, or they see where they're at. And if the room reacts, they're like, all right, cool. Now I can kind of let it eat a little bit. And if the room is like reacts poorly, they'll almost like heckle the room. They'll be like, really? Like, come on, the rest of my material is going to be bad.
Sure.
So I think what you do is, early on with certain players, and it's always almost individualized, right? You have some early litmus test interactions where you drop some stuff and you see how they react to it. And if they like it, you give them more of it. And if they don't, just kind of like take it easy for a bit with that guy, right? Or like maybe you change your material up and you tailor it. And it's not really, I don't see it as disingenuous or like you're tailoring the way you are to the player. But I think it's more of an effort to meet that player where they are, right? And so like the way a comedian might tell different jokes in San Diego than you would tell in Des Moines, Iowa, right? Or the room might react differently, maybe in a pleasant way that he didn't expect. I think on some level, that's what coaching is. Like you got to be coming up with new material.
Yeah.
You can't just be running the same set you ran 10 years ago. And if you're doing it right, your material will get better and it'll get sharper, but it will keep the same flavor. So I think that's how I see it, at least. And I told somebody this today. I have a pretty lewd sense of humor, I would say. Like I like to crack jokes, and it's a big part of my game. And if I can't crack jokes with you, you're probably not going to like me as a coach.
Right.
So hopefully that ties those two things together.
Yeah, it does. I think that I was really listening to that, but I had this question that I didn't want to lose, so I've held on to this, because you said something there too about meeting the player where they're at. I wish I could remember the name of this instructor. I went to a yoga retreat a long time ago, and I took the instructor out for coffee afterwards because I was so fascinated by her teaching. And she had said, you always meet the learner. You learn the learner. That's exactly what you just said in a different way, and the way I heard it. But something that's really unique about you is you speak two different languages, and you work in the big leagues, where one of the things I think is very cool about Major League Sports is that you can work with a 22-year-old and, in your case, about to be a 42-year-old. And so in that scenario, there's literally 2 decades of a range. That's like generational changes.
Right.
And you're also in an environment where there's a lot of money involved. There's fame, there's status, and I'll end it here because I'm really curious to hear your take on this. You're also in a very crazy melting pot of people from all over the world, especially baseball's only, I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like if we're thinking the 4 major sports in America, baseball's got to be the most diverse.
Yeah, I mean, I guess soccer wouldn't be in there.
I was
as
going
the
to do
four major,
basketball,
but
baseball, football, hockey.
yeah,
I was
hockey.
going to say,
I mean, hockey's probably got a lot of foreign guys, right?
yeah, but I still feel like it's the same European,
Yeah.
Finland, Russia.
Yeah, I'd have to check the percentages.
Like
as of
you're
late,
like the
but
same
it's-
hemisphere.
Yeah.
Like in baseball, you literally have people from Korea, Japan. You have Dominican,
Yeah, and
Mexico.
it's even getting more so.
That's what
right?
I'm saying.
Yeah.
So you are exposed. You've been exposed to that for a long time, even in the minors. And you've seen wide ranges of ages, and you speak different languages, which I've always been. I've always been fascinated by that of the brain of being able to navigate both those things. But you do that in a day, and you're trying to meet people where they're at. Walk me through that, because that's got to be a fun thought experiment.
I think the reason language and linguistics have always been really interesting to me is because they felt like, like the janitor keychain that has like all the keys on it. Like that's what it felt like if you could talk.
Storyteller.
If I could talk Spanish, if I could talk English, if I could talk nerd, if I could talk, nerd's a language at this point. Everybody calls it analytics, right? But it's just like being able to understand what the people that are way smarter than us are talking about and relay that info in a simple way. Part of it too is like, I mentioned that you can only connect the dots looking backwards, but when I was a kid, I was the oldest of 4 kids. My parents were young, and anytime they would go somewhere, they couldn't always afford a babysitter. So I can remember being 7, 8 years old and being like in an adult event with my parents and having to hold conversations with people, like say hello, say goodbye, say thank you, ask for something if I needed it, and interact with all different ages of people at these events that we would go to with my parents. Nothing crazy, but just, normal, diverse people interaction in New Orleans, Louisiana, or wherever we might be. And I didn't realize how instrumental that was later in being able to connect with different people, right? I took Spanish from the 3rd grade through college. And actually, I went to a really nice private school in uptown New Orleans that my mom worked at and my dad worked at. So I was able to go there, I think, for less than the going rate, but stuck with Spanish all the way through high school. Could have tested out of it in college, but decided to keep it so I could get some A's in there to help the GPA. And then come to find out, I go to rookie ball in Elizabethton, Tennessee in 2004, and I got 5 or 6 guys in our bullpen that didn't speak any English. So now I'm taking my school learned Spanish and taking it to the streets with these guys. We're playing dominoes in the clubhouse. We're talking shit during the game. And my Spanish got a lot better, right? Even my first year in pro ball, 2015, I was the only I was one of the only Spanish speaking pitching coaches in the GCL in Florida where I was working. And so there were some pitching coaches that couldn't always hold a conversation with the Latin American players and couldn't work with them on their delivery or their pitches. And so I got a chance to do that, right? And what it meant was I had more access. I had more access to more players, to more coaches, to more ideas. And I wasn't planning this all out. It just happened to work out that way, that the exposure to information for me was greater because of my ability to speak different languages. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it's why people travel. I think it's why people like the line of work that we're in, because of the exposure to the different types of people across the whole. I mean, think of all the people in the Giants organization and how different their skill sets are. Right. And how you get to talk to somebody like Shane Alexander or Simon Ricci or Gabe Kapler and, gain their experiences because you're not just only looking to talk to people like you.
Right. Yeah, I think the access points to me really stands out. What have you learned? What can you, it's a question that could go all night, but if you were to compile all of that and package it into something you've understood about humanity because of all the access points you've had to such a wide range of people, what comes to mind when you're hearing me say that?
I think everybody's looking to connect. I think everybody has interest in having some level of connection, right? So we've all been around the player that is the lone wolf, so to speak, or the guy that is the happy-go-lucky party guy. Both of those guys, even if they're not showing it outwardly, are trying to have some deeper level of connection than just,
Right.
hey, throw me a beer, or hey, get out of my way, I got to do my workout now.
Yeah.
Right. And we've both encountered every guy along that spectrum. So I think that is what happens at the core of it. And I think if you're a good coach or you're a good educator, I think you're a good connector.
Is that a connector of connecting with the person, or getting the person, can it go even further of getting the person to just connect? Let's think of it like that.
Yeah.
So it's not just meeting them or connecting with them. Can coaches middleman or bridge connections for that person to just feel more? Because the way I took that was we're all trying to connect with just each other as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're outside of the world of baseball, it's just considered an interconnected world. And we'd all just love to be, I do think that we all want to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to be seen. We all want to be valued.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to do that because just naturally over time, it's kind of such a hard world in general that I think that's where we build up those walls.
Yeah.
But back to the question, because that's a whole other thing. I was already starting to think of another thing. Back to the question, can a coach just help somebody feel connected in general?
I think they can. Yeah, I think it stems from being earnest and authentic and genuine with the player. I mean, you and I have been around enough people now, we can tell when somebody's full of shit or when somebody is just faking interest, right? And so I think it has to come from a place of authenticity. But it probably ties back to like the chemical release that happens, right? Whether it's serotonin or dopamine or like the feelings that come along with, man, we're really getting something done here. You know, like I just asked you about your family and you asked me about my family, and now we're talking about pitch shapes or whatever it is. Like we're not all going to sit around the fire and sing Kumbaya. But I think how much of that happens when you're just kind of off by yourself doing your own thing.
Right.
Not a ton, right? So I think we're wired for it. I think it's evolutionarily advantageous to be that way. And I think the people that can tap into it, they just end up being able to unlock something extra from their relationships or from the players that they coach. And maybe it works both ways with the players and the coaches as well, right?
Do you think that the more you've learned yourself has helped you see that energy in people, we'll say, quicker? Like, have you noticed a growth in the more that you dive into who you are? You pick up on that energy from people quicker?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's a deep one. I think the more I engage with the world, the more I learn about myself. And so I think that includes all the players that I get to interact with, all the staff that I get to interact with. I would say, I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that one, to be honest. But I do think, like, if you're making a real effort with someone, that means something to them. And maybe there's a change that happens right away. Here's a good point related to that, actually.
Yeah.
I think, so I mentioned earlier, I didn't play in the big leagues, played in the minor leagues, right? So I would always joke that, like, I played for 6 years in the minors and I coached for 6 years in the minors. And in my 7th year, I made it to the big leagues. So I'm officially a better coach than I was a player, right? I think part of the reason for that is that I've approached most players that I've come in contact with trying to learn from them. So sometimes it's about me trying to teach them something, right? But a lot of the times, guys like Alex Cobb, guys like Carlos Rodon, Kevin Gossman, Blake Snell, Logan Webb, all these guys that have come through our organization in the last 4 years, I've learned more from them than I've probably taught them. And so not only am I learning from guys like Whoa, but watching guys do things at a high level that I myself wasn't able to do is kind of informing my coaching in another way, because I'm picking up from kind of their playbook.
Mm-hmm. That seems so reasonable, and I guess I should say it seems like that's such a no-brainer. But I think the hard part about coaching in the big leagues is that it's kind of paradoxical to if you were coaching those high school kids. because largely the commercialization of youth sports is I'm paying you to coach me. And obviously there's a different dynamic when you're in an organization and you're both sort of the employee of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about that in a reversal in the big leagues. Now all of a sudden it's like, yes, you are coaching, but you're also, I guess you are learning from high school kids too.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, you are I do think some of the best aspects. Let me say it this way. I was talking to Tom Murphy about this summer. This will help me get there. And I was telling Murphy that one of the things that I like about my favorite thing about being in the big leagues is that these are all the most unique performers on the planet. So you came out of whatever you came out of, your structure, and you were the person who made it.
Yeah.
And in that, you are in here creating your own art uniquely from yourself, your own unique experience. And you sort of were the person that climbed out of the city and the college and the high schools and all the environments and the structures that you came from, the minor leagues. And now my job is to just watch you and learn how you paint metaphorically. And if I see you getting out of your structure, maybe I can hold a mirror up to you. But even in those moments, I can't tell you what to do. But you have a little bit more tactical side, and the pitching side are more skill specific.
Yeah.
But is that like one of the things you noticed when you got to the big leagues, is that does it flip and you do become more of a student in a coaching role? So I can see it being intimidating, I guess, is where I'm coming to.
I think it depends on your own mindset, like how you want to approach it. And I think for me, I approached it like I want to learn. I want to be a student here because I wasn't at this level as a player. I also think it has to do with the player's age and their disposition.
Okay.
Right. So like when I was a high school coach in Louisiana, there's not many 16-year-old kids that are coming up to me and telling me how they throw their nasty curveball, right?
Good point. Yeah.
But like, but watching, watching Luke Jackson snap off a 12-6 breaking ball and seeing how he troubleshoots it in a bullpen setting, or how he goes through a tough patch over a couple months of poor performance, is informative, right?
Sure.
And for me, it's a big learning lesson to see how these guys go about their craft, the cues they work through. I mean, Cobby's a case study on cues, right? Like, and there's stuff that you borrow from one player and give it to another, and you kind of feel like you're doing your job, passing it along from one generation to the next, or whatever that looks like. But it's not all like new material. I'm not like coming up with all this stuff myself. In fact, there's a term in architecture they call lifting, right? It's like so many times when guys are designing buildings, they lift from a previous building, or they see elements in 5 buildings that they synthesize into one. And I think on some level, that's what the connection of ideas is. It's just like grabbing little nuggets that you're attentive enough to recognize are good nuggets, and then knowing when and who with to deploy those things, right? So, it's creative. It's a practice. Like,
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because that's what you're doing, right? It's a way of, to use the Rick Rubin analogy, it's a way of being. Like have you realized when your antenna is really channeling in stuff and things are really coming to you and you're picking up on things? Do you notice times throughout a long year where maybe sometimes it's not channeling?
Yeah. I think that revolves around my mental state, or my, if you're hitting like flow on the times that you need to be perceptive about it. I also think that like, I don't know if like it's the source in a Rick Rubin type way, right? But it's like having your antenna up to pick up on something.
Well, that's how I'm taking it. Like, I'm hearing you and I'm thinking of it as you're essentially this channel. Like, and you're getting these reps with players after players, and a lot of the guys you just named, and daily you're seeing things daily. You're taking analytics in daily. You're getting information in daily. You're having conversations with staff members and front office, and there's so many data points, not just on an actual computer. It's like it's all being funneled into you.
Yeah.
And then how many moments do you have during a day when you have to make decisions like that. Do I channel this out now? Do I say this? Do I not? Do I hold it back? Do I push it forward? And the clearer I got to imagine your channel is, the more you're able to facilitate things to players at the right time. And I'm sure you're the ultimate judge of, did that land? Kind of takes us back to what we were saying.
Yeah.
But have you noticed things? Is that what it is? A flow? Have you noticed when it's really coming out of you and you're really feeling it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you got to have good EQ, right? You have to have a really good honed sense of body language. And, you know, if a guy's rolling his eyes, like to your point earlier, there's been times when I've been launching into a narrative about what this guy needs to do with this breaking ball, and I can see he could give a shit what I'm saying,
you're not in.
And I'm bailing. Like I'm not following through with it. I'll give him a minute or a week or a month before we go back to it. So you have to be well tuned there. And I'm not assigning the importance to being a coach as these other disciplines I'm going to list, but like, if you're a doctor, you have a medical practice. If you're a lawyer, you have a law practice. If you're an architect, you have an architectural practice. If you're a yogi, you have a yoga practice. These are things that like you work on your whole life and you never nail, right? You're never done doing it. So I think coaching is the same way. I think it's why some of the OG coaches, the John Woodens of the world, the Bill Belichick's of the world, the Jim Leland's of the world, those guys are so revered because it's like they did it all the way through. And the career is over, but they like probably could have kept going if they wanted to, because they were just going to continue to improve.
Does that excite you, thinking about where you're at right now? And you have, I mean, it's not like you started coaching yesterday. You have a pretty decent body of work, but you have so much ahead of you as well. What's that line like with you? Do you allow yourself a lot of times to visualize the length of the future and sort of getting into that category of like a Jim Leland, or do you not like spend a lot of time there and just trying to be in the moment? Like, what's your relationship with that, with being prepared for doing this actual job so I can execute it? Yeah. But then also what is out in front of me, what I want to try to accomplish, those sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good segue to, I was talking to some of the minor league coaches today. We're getting to connect early on in camp here. And I told them something that I've told players that I've had in the past, is that like, I feel like players get really focused on what they are or what they want to be, right? Okay. Like I want to be a big leaguer. And I think if I took an A-ball guy who's not prepared to be a big leaguer and I put him in the big leagues, he could then tell everyone he's a big leaguer, but he wouldn't really be ready to be a big leaguer. So in the meantime, my suggestion is that he should just focus on what he can do, right? So put do over be and really just hammer what the daily do is, right? Like what can I do today to get better? What can I do this week to get better? And so I think that's how I've applied that to my own life, right? It's like, do I want to be a Hall of Fame coach? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't want to be. But I think in the meantime, like I'm just really focused on what I can do to be good. And I think if I focus on that, then the rest will take care of itself. Here's
a question that I would probably like to ask more coaches. I think I'm just comfortable to ask you this. Because if you're a player, if you're sitting with me right now and you're a player and you say to me, I want to play 10 more years and make X amount of money, and I want to be a Hall of Famer, and I want to have 4 All-Star appearances and win the World Series. Generally speaking, me in that position as the person listening thinks nothing of that.
Yeah.
Why is it flopped why does it seem perceivably, generally speaking, if a coach sits in that chair and goes, I want to be the best coach in the game and win 7 World Series, make X amount of what contracts, and I want to be a Hall of Famer. Why does that all of a sudden, and again, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but perceivably, why does that almost feel like cringy when it's the coach?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I think we think nothing of a player doing it because that's how we've all been somewhat like taught how to do it. You set goals, right? Then you go achieve those goals. I personally have kind of moved away from goals. Like I think that bearing and direction and the path is a little more enjoyable than where you're going, right? And we've all had goals that we've set and we've hit them. And what happens when you hit those goals?
You usually get sad afterwards.
You get sad, or you don't really feel much. You have some elation.
You're sad that nothing happened.
Yeah, you might party for a night, right? And then the next day or the next week, you're like, all right, what's next, right? So I think that the players that say that type of thing, you think nothing of it because it's commonplace. I think nothing of it because I just don't think it's that productive. So I just don't think that is what causes greatness, right? Even if there's an excellent Kobe Bryant interview where he's talking about why he plays the game of basketball, right? And, somebody asked him, the interviewer is like, oh, is it because you wanted to get paid well? Is it because you wanted championship rings? He goes, I played to find out. That's why I played. I played to find out if I was as good as I thought I was. And I feel like that's how I treated my career when I was a baseball player. And that's what I'm really trying to do right now as a coach is I just want to find out if I'm as good a coach as I think I can be. And, time will tell.
I had a conversation this morning with a guy, a baseball player. And he's he's been a professional baseball player for a few years now. And we were kind of talking about this same concept. Obviously, he's a player, so he's in that lane. And I said, one of the things that's always been really intriguing to me about listening to professional athletes is that it's, for whatever reason, I think it might just be societal, but we structure that thing like it's its own life. Mm-hmm. And if we could view, because I would agree with you, I've found that as I've gotten older, I've found that the path, that feels, I consider that's flow. That's when I'm connected to the source. I'm doing the thing that means the most to me. And if I can exist in my day and be excited for the day, there is no way there's an amount of money that I can attach to that as being equivalent to how important it is to have that day.
Yeah.
And to regularly do that. Yeah. And that's become only more important to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's with getting older, maturity, or considering what it would be like to die and actually processing things, or watching people getting older, things like that. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure you know what I'm saying. When you hear the player, it's weird sometimes that they are trapped in the perspective. Again, I think it's just more of a society thing, the way that we structured society, that's their own life, so that they have a window and they're coming to it quicker than the actual life that they're living. So therefore it makes rational sense to have goals and act as if that's really matters. Yeah. Whereas when I hear the Kobe Bryant thing, now obviously I didn't know him, but I did see that interview. It's like it can be masked by the basketball player, but was he saying that in terms of finding out who he was, and he was using basketball to get to that? And then it doesn't just die there. Yeah. That's just like the paintbrush that he had to carve into himself, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's like at its core, it's intrinsic motivation, right? It's not like a rewards-based system. It's like, I just want the gratification of winning this game or being this good, right? I think too, this is kind of an interesting segue for me. I was talking to my wife the other day about how, we live in this world as athletes where we're trying to outsmart the next hour of our day. Right? I'm going to go lift now. I'm going to go get some treatment from the trainer. I'm going to throw. I'm going to hit the sauna. I'm going to, do some recovery work. And if I do all that stuff, I'll be better. Right? I think, for me as a player, if I can remember, it was, a while ago now, but I felt like when I was playing, that was the only time I wasn't thinking that way. Right? So when I was in the game and I was pitching, I was only thinking about the next pitch. And in some ways, that is really like close to how life goes, right? Where it's like one moment at a time, one pitch at a time. Like if being present and being mindful is really just not trying to outsmart the next hour or week or month of your life, and enjoying the thing that's happening right this minute, right? Because it's like now and then now and then now and then now. Everything else before that is just a part of your imagination because it's over. And everything past that point is a part of your imagination because it hasn't happened yet. Yeah. So I actually really miss that part of my life, right? And it's stuff that happens maybe when you're hiking or when you're playing another sport or when you're with your kids or something like that, that you're not like just grinding on, okay, like what are all the things that I'm going to do next that's going to make me better or that's going to take me to the location or the destination or the goal that I want to go to.
Yeah, I had a memory while you were saying that. I had a memory, for whatever reason, this popped into my head as you were speaking about a game I pitched in college. And I remember I threw a complete game, and the whole time I just was throwing fastballs like low and away. And in college, you could just do that and throw that far off the plate,
Yeah.
you know, and just crush it. But I remember the whole game, I felt like I could throw it to that glove the entire game. And it was exactly what you were saying. It was like 2.5 hours of a euphoric drug.
Mm-hmm.
Where I just was able to repeat this thing, and it wasn't anything but just magic after magic after magic. But ultimately it was just like pitch, pitch, another pitch, another pitch, and a series of nows. And you're right. It is really difficult to get that in life. I feel like that's why I enjoy writing, because I've only found that outside of sports. I've found that in writing. I can somewhat find it in reading, but I can also get fatigued in reading. I've been able to write long form and just like be in, I guess we'll use it, word after word after word.
Right. Yeah. I mean, on the last podcast you and I did, it was a year ago, but I think I listened to it, I don't know, a month ago or something because I was curious. Or maybe it just came out.
It just came out.
So I listened to it recently and we talked about that NPR podcast, the kindergartening, where it's some parents want to be architects and some parents want to be gardeners. Right. So the architect parents set up piano practice and baseball practice and tutoring because they think if they just fill the day with all these activities, their kid will turn out a certain way, the same way an architect picks out materials and the layout and all those things. Right.
Yeah.
And then the gardening parents are just kind of like sunlight and water. Right. You could just throw some seeds in a field, and if they get enough sunlight and water, they're going to grow. So most parents go back and forth between those two things with their kids, and that leads to a nice balance, but it also applies to us.
Yeah.
Right. So like we think that we can be our own architects. And I think in some ways you can, but it's not all architect all the time. We each need like the sunlight and water piece to get like the balance between the two. And I've been thinking about that a lot personally lately. One, because I got 2 kids and I want to make sure that I'm not always architecting them.
Yeah.
You know, you're about to have a kid, so you'll probably need to give some thought to that.
I'm
as
getting
well.
the design.
Yeah.
I'm putting the design together.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's tough to turn off. The architect is tough to turn off sometimes. And I think the players that are like, I'm going to hit 300 and I'm going to get this much money. I'm going to make, it's good to have goals, but I think if you get too focused on those, you might lose the trail.
Yeah, I agree. So let me wrap this up with this thought with you, because I know that I would be bummed out if we ended this show and I didn't ask you this or and let you just rip on this for a second.
No.
So you can tie this into sports if you'd like as well, but this has been something that, and I haven't seen you in a few months, so this is what I've been ruminating on. So I just finished, and I talked about this. People who listen to my podcast will probably be like, all right, buddy, keeps talking about it. But I've read Friedrich Nietzsche's work, which I love his work, philosopher of Europe, I believe Germany essentially, and in the 19th century. And I love his work. And I just read his book, Anti-Education, which I read over the course of, it's not a long book, it's a small book, but it's a book that and at least it's kind of hard to read. Not hard to read, but it's like, you just got to be like dialed into it.
It's dense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it took me like a month or 2 to read it, maybe even a little bit longer. And when I was reading that book, and I think you and I have talked about this, you know how when you're reading books, you sort of see the world through that book. Mm-hmm. Like you start to pick up on things that are just in what you're reading, even in conversations. You go, what I'm doing to you exactly right now. I'm selfishly bringing in what I've been reading. So I read that book. I dive into how the education system started happening in the last couple hundred years and the molding of the mind. And I haven't been able to get off of it because it's such a fascinating topic to me. And I have a lot of opinions about education in general. And a lot of it has to do with my own experiences, which is, we don't have to talk about this right now. I want to keep going on this thought. So he writes a lot of stuff about how education is going to actually destroy the geniusy. And he's projecting that's only going to continuously happen because education becomes a rinse and repeat system because the educators are, let me pull back for just a second. The reason why it'll become rinse and repeat is because doing whatever is fundamentally right will always be the hardest thing to do. So the behavior of the human will naturally default to conformity. And so in education, rather than evolve your thinking and get outside the box and be constantly learning, changing material, which is extremely hard to do, you'd rather just understand your curriculum, get it, rinse and repeat it, teach it to the next educator, the educator teaches it to the student, and then if we standardize the testing and standardize the education, then we can at least measure the intelligence of these people, right? And so the way that I understood it is that Germany found out in the ages of 7 to 14, around these times, that you could mold these minds, and they were molding it for the assembly lines and the military and their working force. We essentially went over and we grab a hold of Rockefeller, I think Henry Ford, like that era of entrepreneurship, goes and grabs that curriculum, that process, that structure, if you will, that design. They bring it over here to America. And then, as you know, like, we've been an assembly line 9 to 5 corporate structure for over hundreds of years now.
Right.
And I do think that that's breaking, whether it's supposed to be breaking or not. I think it's been breaking because of COVID, because the world changed drastically in a moment. I think the social media information era is changing that, because you're getting information from so many things. And
we export all our labor. So
so a lot of these things, I think, are just kind of like poking at this thing that's been around for a while.
Right.
But today, as I was hanging out, I'm getting ready to think deeper about this, and I'm trying to tie a bunch of concepts in. I read this research article, and I saw a friend of mine who plays hockey overseas. I'm probably going to talk to him about it tomorrow, but we had kind of lined up on this research, and this guy, George Land, please be the accurate name. It was sent by NASA to go in the 1960s. NASA wanted him to go find geniuses. Hanging with me here so far?
Yeah, I'm following.
So NASA wants him to go find geniuses in the 1960s, and he goes out and he finds that ages 4 to 5, 98%, it was a 1,600 person study. 98% of the 1,600 4 to 5 year old kids were geniuses in imagination and creativity. So this blows his mind from what I was reading, gathering from his work. And he goes, okay, I'm going to create a longitudinal study here, and I'm going to see this thing through, because this is mind blowing to him. And he finds out 5 years later, so he gives it a 5-year buffer period. He goes back and he tracks it, and the 98% geniuses of these 1,600 kids turns into 30%. Yeah, that's got to be exact. That's got to be accurate. So now he's even more rattled, and 5 years later, at age 15, it goes from 30% to 12%. And then obviously after the 5 year, from 15 to 20, you're kind of reaching adulthood. That's kind of when we start predicting like the brain to form, et cetera, et cetera. And he, at the end of I didn't read the entire thing, but I was just going through these like stats of it.
Yeah.
And his comments on it, and like why this happens. And so there was still a little bit more that I can probably dive into later, and I'm sure we can talk about it later. He showed in his research that in the adult population, of the 98% geniuses that once existed at age 4 and 5, was now only 2%.
Yeah.
So adult population had 2% geniuses.
Yeah.
If you can connect all of that thought, and this is where this was popping in my head through a lot of stuff you were saying. Yeah. I would have brought this up to you afterwards, but I want to do it now when we're on the podcast. And I'm going to selfishly bring it all into this thought. It's like, do you think that, what is your thoughts around that, first of all? And then the second part of that is, as teachers or coaches, you teach a finished product person, essentially. And then we could maybe we could maybe say subjectively, I think it's an opinion that those are the geniuses of the craft. As a teacher of the genius of a craft, what is your thoughts on how we teach athletes or teach students, but we'll stay on athletes for that matter, I guess. Do you think that we rinse and repeat and almost hurt the individual genius of an athlete because we wouldn't even be able to know what that is? So do you think that all of our information, all of our curriculums, all of our credentials and our paths, do you think that it almost ends up hurting the potential of what a player could be wholly?
Yeah.
Sorry, that took me a long time.
No, I was about to compliment you on landing that plane. We were on the runway for a while. It was a long flight. We had some turbulence, but you landed it.
I kept slowing down to just make sure I was
No, it was good.
there.
You stayed on track. And I think, so I have a short answer, and then, as I always do, I have a long answer, right?
Yeah.
I think number one is, this ties back to learning from players that are at this level that I didn't play at, right? So it's like, if you went to Juilliard, right, and you went and watched all the musicians play their instruments, and you had never played in a symphony orchestra yourself, would you be there instructing people how to hold their cello or how to press the button on their saxophone, right? Like, you wouldn't be. You'd actually be paying more attention to how the high-level people are doing it than you would be trying to look for errors, right?
Wow, yeah.
So I think for me, it means taking the assumption into work that this guy is doing something right and unique, right? So not, man, delivery looks like shit, or man, that's a bad breaking ball. Looking at it like, man, what has this guy done that has carried him here? So like, all these players have superpowers that you have to recognize and play up. So that's, I guess, kind of the short answer is like,
yeah, it's beautiful.
I do think that each guy at this level has a superpower, and it's not one that I taught him. Right? They might be able to have another superpower that I could help them turn something else into, right? But really they've made it this far somewhat on their own through their talent, right? Related to what you said about, kids being geniuses, I think it's in Culture Code or one of the books like that. It might be Range, actually, the David Epstein book. They talk about they give these people they give a group of people a bunch of different toys to build something out of, right? And one of the groups of people that they give them to is some kindergarten kids, and they give them an assignment, like they need to build something that can hold up a dictionary or something like that.
Okay.
And routinely, the kindergartners do better than some people that are 30, 35 years old working at Fortune 500 companies, because the kids aren't anchored to what those objects actually are used for, right? So if like you have a tongue depressor or a Q-tip or a balloon, the kids aren't like thinking, well, you have to be used this way because they've already learned the way to use them. Kids are more creative playing with toys when they don't know what the toys are for. This is why kids play with cardboard boxes and rocks and sticks and stuff that isn't molded plastic that you get in a store that has a specific use for it. Right? They're actually like way more creative with things that they haven't been taught how to use. So I think why the genius number reduces over time is someone is telling them the way to do things, right? Whether that's in school, or school is picking the books that they're exposed to, or it's picking the subject matter that they're studying, right? This is why you and I are both readers, and I'm not like tooting our own horn as much as I am like, if you don't have perspective, if you can't empathize with someone else, you're probably not a reader, right? Because when you read a book,
it's a really good point.
Yeah, when you read a book, you can try it on like a jacket, right? Like this is what I'm wearing today. This is how I'm looking at the world today. And the more books you've read, the more jackets you've tried on, the more you know your tastes, and then more you know other people's tastes in some ways, right? Like you can assume the character in the book's point of view. So I think the more that we are told how to think, and the more we are told what to read and what to consume, and the more that we're exposed to, it's like why everybody can sing some shitty pop song that's on the radio all day, because you've just been ground down by it, right?
Yeah.
And so to tie both of those together, hopefully, the genius reduction and the genius of players in the big leagues, on some level, they are performance artists, right? Like they're creating every time they go out to the mound with or to the plate with their body language, with the way their body moves, with the pitches that they throw, with their reaction to the things that happen. Like people are literally paying to show up and watch them do their art. And so for me to try to make all of their art look the same would be so misguided, right? And so I guess just trying to appreciate each guy's technique and the art they bring to the table, for me, is a very important thing to do. And that comes with watching them, trying to learn from them, trying to make sure that they're in the best possible frame of mind to do their art.
Yeah, that's a great way to bring it all together. And really what landed with me at the end of that, I think your perspective of learning as a coach, I think that really made the most sense to me, what you just said. Like, I think all that tied together. I understand what you were saying earlier about that, but what you just said really resonated with me, because it's like you are somebody who is mastering the eye and the ability to see what makes people unique and creating a structure for that individual to be the fullest of their expression that they could potentially be. And I think that that's what hit me a lot with what you were saying just now, is that the better that you can become observant of that and get more data to more artists, your eye has got to have more art to it. Like, right. I would imagine your unique observation skills are just getting wider. It's right. Kind of the book reading. Yeah. It's like the more books I read, the more jackets, but the same thing, the more diverse of the players, the more range of the players, the more uniqueness I see of the players. Now all of a sudden I have this collection of what I've been exposed to. Right. You know, yeah. Yeah, I think that's really what lands with me right there.
To bring it back a little bit earlier too, like I told you that when I was playing, that was really the only time that I wasn't trying to engineer something, right? I was just like in that moment and like doing my thing. I always felt the most myself when I was playing. I just felt like I was the most myself when I was on a mound, right? That's you in the perfect game when you're dotting the heater. You're like, you're just you're in yourself doing the thing that you're good at. And so for me, whether it's identity, like you talked about in one of your podcasts recently, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm assuming that
right in the first chapter,
personal identity is a big part of it, right? So like for these players, my job is to help them uncover who they are, right? Like, how do they pitch? What does their competitive nature look like? And that it's really just up to me, or it's my job to help them uncover and get closer to their identity, right? That's the goal. And when they can get closer and closer to that, they're gonna be the best version of themselves, right? For Logan Webb, that's different than it is for Alex Cobb. It's different than it is for Robbie Ray. And for me, that's a pretty exciting thing to be a part 100%. Of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's mastering the craft. It's your own art. That's your own art. And I think that you found a ton of tools to expand on your art. And you found out I love the analogy you did of the janitor's keys. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's what makes coaching so fun, is that you do learn how to communicate with so many different layers and levels of people. I will say, and then we can finish it off here, but I know that one of the things that I was shy growing up to talk to people, but I always did it, and I was forced to do it. Similar to what you were saying about when you kind of felt like you had to grow up fast at that young age. I mean, I was a door-to-door sales paper boy at the age of 10. You know, I was dropped off on a street. They left me. I had papers and portfolios for people to sign up for, and I just went and knocked on doors in a neighborhood. And you found out what sold. You found out what puppy dog face worked and what puppy dog face didn't work. And you got the energies of the people who came to the door. and this is definitely not going to be a sale. And I could tell even when I got a little bit older, it's just like you're talking about with the players. I could tell, like when I was older, meaning like 12, 14, 15,
Mm-hmm.
and I could tell when someone would come to the door that I wasn't going to be able to sell them, and I would just get through it really quick, because the more time you spend at a door, the less money you would make.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, I can tell this isn't going to be a buyer, I'm out.
Yep.
And it would just be real quick. I don't remember exactly what I would say, but it was short and sweet. And I sort of learned how to communicate like that, even though it was nerve wracking. My dad was in the newspaper, so it was kind of inevitable. It was something that was just given to me as a job that I had to do. It's kind of this is what you have to do.
Job. Yeah.
But I learned a lot about that, and I hated it because I was always shy and I didn't love necessarily talking to people, but I've always been interested in listening to people. And when I started podcasting, I was nervous to talk to people. So I figured if I podcasted people, I would meet such a range of people, and I would communicate with them. And I think as I've done that over the years, it's made coaching so fun, because every person's so unique and so different, yet so similar and so connected. And then you get to sit there and listen and watch it, and every rep is an observation. And I think I asked you this a little bit earlier, but as I'm saying this out loud, I think that has helped me be more of me. As you're talking about how to help players be more of them, I think on the flip side of it, of coaching, through the years of being a teacher, I think that has also replayed itself back to me. And it's as I'm trying to help you be more of you, whether that's unconsciously or I don't know what it would be, but I think it's made me also more of me. Do you feel that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like just stripping away the stuff that's not me. Right.
Yeah.
Even in watching coaches and interacting with coaches, thousands of which I've come across their path at this point, there's guys that you see and you like want to be like, and there's guys that you see that you don't want to be like.
Yeah.
And sometimes those lessons on how not to be are even more important than the ones that are how to be, right? So I think that you're about to experience this hardcore with your kid. You see these things that are a part of you that you either don't want to be or that you really like, and you don't want to compromise, right? And so it's just this constant process of like soul cleaning, where you're like, I'm cutting this part off and I'm adding this part on. And I feel pretty strongly that like you can make yourself into what it is you want. It takes time and concerted effort and consistency. It might not be spectacular, but
Nice.
I think it's
you're still firing.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm to close it out here.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing to end on.
Yeah, that was a dynamite. I mean, I could have probably kept you going in there and not said anything, but I couldn't help that you just pulled that all the way back to the full thing. Well, I've consistently sipped my tea while you were talking most of the time, so I got no tea left. But cheers, brother. I love you.
Love you too, man. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, have a great year.